Joining me now from Yangon is Aung San Suu Kyi's former spokesman, Nyo Ohn Myint. He is also a former member of the ruling National League for Democracy. Also in Yangon, Richard Weir. He is the author of the Human Rights Watch report about Myanmar's land seizures. And completing our panel in London is Peter Popham. He's Aung San Suu Kyi's biographer and a former foreign correspondent in Myanmar. Thanks all so much for joining us here. Let me begin in Yangon with Nyo Ohn Myint. First of all, what happened to that 6-month plan that the National League for Democracy promised to settle these land compensation claims?
I think it's a very, first of all, we seems to be the talking with the ghosts, because these, like a land grabbing issue, has been happened in the 80s, late 80s and 90s, and early 2000s. So right now, I think the government of Aung San Suu Kyi is trying their best, but the problem is that they have been working on the paper, and then like reports are really clear. The administration, the top administrators are very pleased at the reports. But on the ground situation, I might say that that's going to be maybe a one land. The owner, it's a 6. And who's going to be real owner, and then those problems of the administrative problems, and then also the change of command, and then some the district, the corruptions, and so many challenges right now we have.
So at its most basic level, the plan was overly ambitious.
I might say that that's true. That's a very difficult, because her first priority of during the campaign of the peace, and then second is the peace, and third is the peace, and still struggling.
Okay, Richard Weir, is that a good enough excuse, or is the government just not delivering on its promises because either it doesn't want to compensate these farmers anymore, or it can't keep up?
Well, I mean, I think it's mostly a problem of it can't keep up. It's absolutely right that this is an extremely complicated issue. Of course, it's correct that the vast majority of these land confiscations happened years ago. But what that means on the ground is that there are farmers in what is mostly a rural society who have spent decades without redress, compensation, or return of their lands. And the NLD, I mean, the NLD obviously is struggling to contain a number of extraordinarily serious crises in the country. But that overlooks the fact that it has a majority in the parliament where it can pass reforms and it can create committees to really tackle these issues. And what we're seeing when we're speaking with these farmers who have gone so long without justice is that the NLD has come up far short of the promises it made when it was campaigning to be the ruling party.
But I mean, Richard, can you accept that that's normal, that they make all sorts of promises during their campaigns that they're not prepared really to deliver on, but it can be forgiven, or no? There's no justification for this failure to deliver?
Well, I think it's absolutely the case that there are capacity problems within every government, and there are certainly it's certainly the case that parties make claims about what they can and can't do, and then realize they can't deliver. But this is one of these central problems in Myanmar. You have thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of acres seized, and the country really, it's not going to be able to go forward with a number of other developments if it can't solve this major issue.
Okay.
And so it's been a number of years, and there's plenty of opportunities that they've squandered in order to make a serious impact for the lives of these farmers.
Okay, Peter, is the government trying hard enough?
I think it's not surprising, as both Richard and Nyo Ohn Myint have said, that this problem is taking a long time to solve. The first time I went to Burma in 1991, a long time ago, this is one of the first issues that people told me about. I was taken to, there's a famous tourist place called Pagan, sometimes known as Bagan, which is famous for its hundreds and hundreds of ancient temples. And the people who lived there and who sold lacquerware in particular, but other goods to the tourists, had all been moved summarily in order to make room for new hotels, and without any compensation, without any notice. And this was, as Richard said, this began in the late 80s after the uprising of democracy and the crackdown by the military. And in all these years, these decades since then, it's become an extremely involved and complicated and hard to solve problem. So, in fact, it's not surprising that it's not been solved. It's not surprising that the NLD government claimed too much for what they would do. And in a way, it's creditable that they have made some steps towards solving it, because in many other areas of the government, for example, in the peace process, let alone in the situation in Rakhine State, and in the question of the rights of expression, the rights of journalists, for example, this government has, far from going forward, has actually begun to go backwards. And that's far more worrying than the snarl-ups over this question.
Okay, Peter, I want to go back later to the actual capability of this government to deliver on those promises, given that the military still does hold a number of seats in Parliament. They do still have a grip on some of the power. But first, I want to understand how realistic the logistics, if I can use that term, the logistics would be in delivering on these land seizure promises. I mean, these claims go back years and years and years, as you've all acknowledged. In that time, this land has been bought and sold. Some of this land is now owned by private investors that arguably the country needs. So is the legal infrastructure even there to sort this out at this point? Because even in developed countries, this is extremely difficult to manage.
It's not surprising that the NLD made extravagant promises before they came to power. It's not merely cynicism on their part, because none of them had ever been actually in government. Suu Kyi herself and her small handful of NLD MPs had been in opposition. So this is the first experience of government basically a large group of people who'd come in from outside the parliamentary system.
Okay, well, Richard, let me ask you about that. I mean, what kind of private interests now at this point is the government up against?
Yeah, I mean, the government is up against an enormous amount of private interests. But what the concern is, it's not that there are private interests, and this isn't obviously a pushback against development that I think could benefit the people of Myanmar writ large, and certainly some of these farmers. The problem is that the way development is pursued, and if it's pursued at the expense of the rights of the people of Myanmar, this is only going to deepen the rights crisis that Myanmar faces. And the fact of the matter is the NLD right now has a significant amount of legislative power where it can go in and clean up a lot of the complicated structure that basically facilitates a lack of accountability. I mean, just in the realm of land laws and regulations, the laws that concern this, there are 70 to 80 laws and numerous different bodies and commissions that operate in order to manage this. That's not something that anybody can really piece through. And it means that when somebody implements this policy and there's a problem, it's extraordinarily difficult for the aggrieved parties to seek accountability. And furthermore, for the government to even figure that out. And so one of the things that is crucial is that the NLD go in and amend a number of these laws, amend or repeal them, in order to enshrine and protect the rights of individual landholders so that development can be pursued in a way that respects the rights of the people of Myanmar.
Okay, Richard, let me pursue that with you then. Is that, what you're talking about, really the best way forward? Because let's look at the bigger picture here. Myanmar needs to modernize its economy. By compensating these farmers, giving them their land back to farm, some have argued you're looking at a return to subsistence agriculture, which does not serve the greater good in Myanmar. So should there perhaps be another approach that helps serve the modernization of Myanmar's economy, pulls people away from this traditional subsistence farming, even though I understand their attachment to the land? Is it really good for Myanmar's future to look at this land compensation on a subsistence basis?
From our perspective, what we're concerned about is the rights of these individuals. And international law, and certainly national law in Myanmar, understands and gives leeway for development, and that's incredibly important. It's less of a question about whether or not the country moves to develop and moves away in some fashion from some subsistence farming, but more about the way that it does that. And so compensation, while we could agree that that returning land might be difficult, compensation is something that is enshrined in international law and would be in line with Myanmar's obligations under human rights law. And it would also not impede necessarily any development. And I think that's critical here.
Okay. Nyo Ohn Myint, let me get your thoughts on what you've heard from both Richard and Peter there.
I think we have so many problems. Of course, the both gentlemen who said, I totally agree with them. But the problem is that we have some land issue, because I've been helping the previous government about that land grabbing, and then also in the Shan state and Kachin state and Jinantai. And then, most of the problems, what I've seen currently I'm a very independent. What I've seen that we have the number one problem is that the politicized problem, because so many the political activists and or maybe from former NLDs who are supporting the farmers and who claim again and again. I saw in that the copper mine in the central Burma, and then people already received the compensation, but they reclaim again. And then the company, joint venture, the Chinese company also provided, whatever amount that the villagers claim for. Because the problem is that the land price is very high, people greed, and also the political instability. These are combination the problem. I totally agree with the human rights, but over here, we got a land, people in Yangon, and then so many, landless people in the entire area, you name it. Because the problem is that the people could not solve their livelihood, plus the government doesn't have a very clear economic policies, how to provide the job creation. So many all over the country, people live in Yangon here. So that we're approximately 7 million, over 7 million. We have a shortage of drinking water, transportation, you name it. So the government should solve the problem and how to provide the job and human rights balancing. But otherwise, the other people are always creating. The funny thing is that some NLD, local people, when they were supporter of when previous government, supporting and then begging the farmers who claim back the land, right now they disappear. So that's a political situation, is that the 80% of our problem.
Okay, Nyo Ohn Myint, then let me ask you this. If you acknowledge that the government isn't able to deliver on those promises, all the promises of compensation and land reform that were made during the campaign, what about the promises to deliver on achieving peace and quelling ethnic tensions, which arguably was the first priority? Is Aung San Suu Kyi still at the mercy of the military, if some of her defenders have claimed? Or can she deliver on at least those promises that she's made her number one effort?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the peace process that I've been doing for 5 years with the former president, Aung San Suu Kyi. And then the real problem is that the trust building. We do not have a trust among the commodore or military and the government, and in between the armed ethnic organizations and commodore, and then also the government and the armed ethnic organizations. So because, I might say that the government thought that it's the previous government, even the former military generals who have their proper understanding about the peace process. Even they could do it. The government thought the current NLD government thought that it was a very easy, but it was not very easy because the government missed to solve the problem or create the trust building and then more understanding and how the ethnic really expectation. That's a problem.
Peter, do you accept that? Was it a question of building trust that was never properly built?
Yes, I think there is a severe problem of mistrust in many areas of the national life. And the promise of democracy, which led to the ecstatic scenes during and after the election campaign of 2015, have evaporated, really, to a large extent. And you've mistrust, certainly, in many of the border regions where there has been no amelioration of the situation, where the tension and the intermittent fighting that's been going on for decades has not gone away. The peace process, which was Aung San Suu Kyi's great goal and stated as such during the campaign, repeating the Panglong conference, which was her father's achievement in bringing at least some of the ethnic groups together with the Burmans for independence, for an independent state. The Panglong conference, which met again recently, has yet to yield anything but very small results. And but basically the military continues to behave along the borders in exactly the way it's been behaving for many, many years.
Okay. Richard Weir, we only have a minute left. I'd just like to get some final thoughts from you.
One of the things that shouldn't be forgotten is that the government can't balance politics and human rights. It has obligations to the people of Myanmar. It can't violate their rights. And there are clear ways in which this government can proceed and pursue development and peace and its political goals while respecting the rights of its people. And it has failed on a number of accounts to do that. And that is extraordinarily concerning. As Peter said, there's been backsliding in a number of critical areas. And this is where the NLD has seriously fallen down. And it needs to redouble its efforts to protect the rights of people across Myanmar, whether it's land rights, whether it's freedom of expression, or again, from violations, gross violations of human rights in Rakhine State and in northern Burma. These are all things that the NLD can work harder on and meet its obligations.
Okay, Richard Weir, I will have to give you the final word because unfortunately we are completely out of time for this segment of the Newsmakers. Thank you all three so much for joining us.